You're listening to What's Contemporary Now, a show about culture and the people, places, and things that together make it up.
This message is brought to you by Abercrombie Kids, where the activewear is made for every summer activity, so your mini-me can bring their personal best. Summer days are always an adventure, from day camp to rec leagues and pool days. Abercrombie Kids has the shorts, tees, and swim to keep them comfy and keep up with them. Get everything for the entire summer at Abercrombie Kids. Shop in-store, online, or in the app.
Today's episode sees one of our favorite past guests return, something we've never done. But when it comes to Carlos Nazario, you know it's going to be good. He's terrible at small talk, which makes him great at real talk, and that's why we thought it made more sense to throw out the interview and just sit down for a chat. We actually recorded this episode several weeks ago, but decided to hold it for the month dedicated to mental health. Not because it's particularly themed, but because his ability to speak to the sacred and the profane of it all is equal parts refreshing and relatable. In a conversation about life, using fashion merely as metaphor, Carlos speaks to the moment we're living in and the timeless truths that we could all stand to remember today.
This is Carlos Nazario, and we're talking about what's contemporary now.
Carlos Nazario, you're the first person that we're having back on the show a second time since we started, and I couldn't be happier because another thing that's unique to this particular opportunity is that we are coming in with no questions. Just a good old conversation.
Wait, is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah.
I could have sworn someone else double dipped, but okay, cool. I'll take it.
We've definitely had double dips from the first iteration, but not since it's turned into a podcast. So you are the leader.
Okay. Well, I'm excited, and I'm always really happy to chat with you.
So am I, which is why I wanted to try this out without any questions or framework and just having a good old-fashioned chinwag.
Raw dogging it.
Exactly. How are you?
I'm good. I'm coming off of the whirlwind that was this show season, which started in January, very early January, because I did, a few shows in men's and then couture and then back to New York to start women's. So this season lasted literally months. And by the end of it, I definitely felt a bit depleted and certainly exhausted. So I took a little cheeky holiday with one of my best friends and sort of reinvigorated myself. So I feel good. I'm on a cleanse right now, so I don't have the most energy, but I'm good.
And what does this cleanse entail?
They're not paying me, so I won't quote them by name, but It's like a liquid, supplements, vitamins, minerals, like shishi, fufu, seeds, and, it's a reset, if you will.
All the good things as one needs after both those 2 months as well as a vacation that was undoubtedly an adventure. But let's talk more about the kind of exhaustion, because I think a lot of people look at a life like yours and a success story with all of that travel and think just how lucky you are. But what we don't often sort of contemplate is what that looks like on the other side in terms of the energy requirement and the time spent and the time away from friends, partners, family, home. So let's talk about that.
I mean, I think both are true, right? I think I'm very lucky and I really lead with gratitude generally. And I think that's one of my main motivating factors. Like that really keeps me going. This sense of pride and thankfulness that I have for our industry and for the opportunities I've been given. And I'm tired, and I think that there are untold demands and obligations that are required in the type of career that I have that, can certainly be mentally and emotionally taxing. Having said that, I definitely am really obsessed with what we do. And I try not to dwell in the exhaustion because I also feel like that's a disease. Like I actually hate talking to people and you're like, hey, how are you? They're like, I'm just so tired, because it is quite a boring thing. And also I just feel like it's sort of a waste of energy to dwell in, your tiredness or your exhaustion. I think we have a responsibility to refill ourselves and to set boundaries so that we can continue to give of ourselves. And I think whenever you work in a creative industry, it's so important that to a certain extent, you can show up as yourself and you have, something to give, because I think ideas are not infinite. Creativity is not infinite. Like you need something to pull from. So if you just sort of keep running on E, then not only are you doing yourself a disservice, but you're doing your clients a major disservice, and it becomes unenjoyable. And I'm somebody who I love what we do. I love working. I don't love the fashion industry, but I love fashion a lot. And like I said, I feel really lucky to be able to work in it at the level that I work in it. And so I never want anyone to come away from an encounter with me personally or professionally and think that guy was dry or he seemed really dead or he just wasn't here. That would be probably the worst criticism I could hear about myself. So I think it's just important to remain in tune with what you need in order to keep yourself present and energetic.
That's the funny thing about fashion people, is that so many people feel exactly the same way you just described, which is that they love fashion, but not necessarily the fashion industry or not necessarily quote unquote fashion people. So what is that delineation in your mind as far as how you see yourself versus the aspects of the industry that you don't like?
I've been doing this a long time now, I think by any estimation. And I can say that the industry that I signed up to work in doesn't really exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think the expectations and the obligations of it have just shifted greatly. And I think a lot of the things that we're tasked with on a daily basis just don't really interest me that much.
Mm-hmm.
However, they're part of the job and you do them and you sort of try to figure out a way to tackle them that still feels in line with your intentions and your taste. But, there's a lot of, I would say, politics and just behind the scenes things that really put a damper on the positive aspects of what we do. But I think that being a part of my generation and a part of the sort of thought vortex that I exist in, it's reassuring because I do surround myself and I am surrounded by people who are like-minded and sort of are aware of the issues that plague fashion right now and are very concerned with figuring out what's next and how to get ourselves out of whatever rut or perceived rut that we're in.
So what do those conversations look like? Because that's definitely something that is on the tips of many tongues today as we see so many shifts happen. Do you feel optimistic? Do you feel hopeful? Do you feel purposeful? Do you feel galvanized?
I am optimistic in general.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's sort of one of my coping mechanisms. I also, as you know, I'm deeply spiritual, and I truly believe in my heart of hearts that things tend to get pretty bad before they get better. And I don't want to be so negative and so doom and gloom and, oh, this is a terrible, time in fashion. But I think that if we're talking about culture at large and just the space that we're in the world, and I'm talking about everything from human rights issues to politics, we're in a moment absolutely of transition, but also to a certain extent of turmoil. I think there's this sort of collision of generations and of generational thoughts that has resulted in what I view as confusion, dissension for sure. And there's no sort of ruling class. I think also the internet has made the playing field very level so that a lot of voices are given equal amount of relevance. And I think it can be confusing. I think it can be hard to decide what's worthy of focusing on and what's worthy of sort of platforming. And I think with this gigantic beast that we've built that constantly needs to be fed with product and content and just shit, really, it can be overwhelming, truthfully. And so I think my main focus right now is how do we sift through the noise? How do we get back to making work and platforming people that really feel important and really feel like the main takeaways of this moment, which I think is one of our duties as thought leaders, which I think fashion people can be. I think there's no more powerful a tool than image. The transformative power of seeing something that you haven't seen before, that revelation that happens within, it can shape opinions. It can move generational thought. It can inspire. And that's where I operate from. And I think that's why I'm still so charged. I feel so passionate about what we do because I know the potential. And again, like I said, I'm surrounded by people who also feel the same. And so I think we take every opportunity to do that, to speak through the images or the work that we create, whatever that may be. But also there's another school and there's another energetic force that is focused on other things, like the commercial aspect of what we do, which is why we all have jobs, right? But I think sometimes those two forces are diametrically opposed. Like, good things don't always make a lot of money. And, I think whenever you have too much of either, then you're probably not in a great space. Like, you need ideas, you need fresh sort of perspectives, which sometimes don't always have the polish or the finish to be like commercially viable. And I mean that in terms of designers, photographers, stylists, any aspect of what we do. Like, in the beginning, it's going to be a little bit messy, but I think it's that messiness that sort of inspires change. And I think if we continue to discourage people from being experimental and everything becomes commercial, quote unquote, which, by the way, I don't think is a bad word, but boring, I guess is what I'm trying to say, then we're going to be stuck in this holding pattern that I think everyone's complaining about right now.
Well, that's the really interesting thing about optimism not necessarily being negated by speaking one's truth, right? I think historically, as an optimist myself, I always chose to speak about what was exciting, what was positive, because I felt like if we spoke about other things, it was a little bit of a sort of come down from where it is that we were trying to go, or trying to stay, or trying to cultivate energetically. And more recently, I've kind of learned that you can be honest about what's not necessarily amazing, and that doesn't have to come at the cost of your optimism. And you've touched upon, the state of the world, not just in the industry, but also just politically and what it is we're all seeing. And I saw something recently that really resonated with me, which was an interview with AOC. And she was saying that we shouldn't feel bad about the ability or need or desire to cultivate joy at a time where there's so much to be upset about, because you don't have to sort of become a martyr. You don't do any service to yourself or the world at large by being taken down by the disheartening news that you're confronted with each day, and that you can cultivate joy, you can cultivate creativity and inspiration without any sort of guilt. And so you talked about the responsibility that we each have in terms of how we show up in a room and our own energy and our own self-care, which some say is an act of generosity. So what does that look like for you? Like, what are those anchors in your life in terms of the ways you retain not just your inspiration, but energy as a whole?
I have a very different background and a very different upbringing, and thus probably a very different set of intentions than a lot of my peers. Just truthfully, I think there's so few people in fashion sort of identify and relate to the very specific conundrum of being a person of color, in my case, Afro-Latino, Black presenting, raised in a very working class environment. I've experienced struggle in a way that has made me extremely resilient. And because I have overcome so many obstacles in my life, not just professionally, although definitely professionally, but also personally, more to the point, it has made me a truly optimistic person. Like, I know it's always going to be okay. And I know that there is such an importance in speaking truth to power. I don't know if it's apparent, but I spent a lot of time and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in therapy to get to a point where I can say kind things to myself and truly believe them, and also say kind things to and about my neighbors, and not feel as though that's taking anything away from me or from my journey, if that makes sense. So, to answer your question, I think it's just a really innate knowledge, belief that I have that, like, we're going to be okay, but also we have to make ourselves and the world okay. Like, we can't wash our hands of things or resolve to believe that somehow that's not our problem. We're fashion people, so maybe we shouldn't get involved. And I think everyone's involvement is different. Everyone has to feel comfortable with the way they're showing up, but everyone can do something.
No, it's true. And I also feel like it's an opportunity while we're touching upon it, just because anytime you and I speak, regardless of whether or not it's for work, some meaningful conversation always comes up just because that's sort of your nature.
Are you saying that I'm intense?
Not at all. I just find it amazing that no matter where we are, if it's a phone call or some quick passing by or on a set, you always have very meaningful and real conversations. And I appreciate that because I'm someone who, similar to yourself, can struggle with small talk. I
hate small talk.
yeah.
Chris, it's like the biggest, like I can't even put into words how anxious small talk makes me, which is why I try to avoid fashion shows unless I feel really compelled to attend them, because the small talk is it is awful. I mean, I don't give a shit about your car ride over, and like, I know it's raining, like, it's raining. And there are quite a few people in fashion who I have to say are incredibly intelligent, thoughtful, amazing conversationalists, super entertaining, who I love running into. Like, I'm not at all saying all fashion people are boring or vapid, but I do think that the way that we socialize when we're in large groups, it is surface, because you don't really know these people and you don't really trust them to a certain extent. Just because you follow someone or you follow their work doesn't mean that they're your friend. And I don't know where I'm going with this or how we got on the subject, but it doesn't feel always like a safe space, I guess,
That was a question I was going to ask you, just because we did talk about the exhaustive nature of small talk during shows. And that's how do you keep your social battery up when you're on the road for 2 months and you're having to go to shows and you're having to work on shows and you're doing shoots and you're going to parties and you're hosting parties? How do you sort of sustain a social battery in those environments based on everything you've just said?
I don't go out very often, as you know. I've done that. I'm not super young anymore. In the grander scheme of things, yes, but I understand what I need in order to keep my eyes on the prize and in order to keep focused on my primary goal, which is to make great work and to be really present and as energetic as possible for every client and every person that I truly care about. And going out at night for the sake of it does not help me to approach those goals. In fact, it deters me from that. So I do as little socializing as possible. The nice thing about Fashion Week is that everyone's in one place at one time. And because fashion is the only thing I've ever done, like truly, I've worked in fashion since I was 16 years old. It's the only thing I've ever done. And I'm really privileged in the sense that I count a lot of people who work in this industry as true friends and true family, like proper, like my people. Like if you say, oh, who's 5 people that you would want in a room? Like 3 or 4 of them work in fashion, either coincidentally or not. Certainly reconnecting with things that remind me of who I truly am outside of the responsibilities of being whoever it is that the industry tells us to be, because I think that's very exhausting. And I think when you live in fashion, in that fashion space, like shows, it's a very unique experience because you really do feel defined by your position or your role, and the caste system and the hierarchy is never on fuller display than in that moment. The seating system and like who's invited to this dinner or not, and all of that doesn't make you feel good, even if you are on those lists and if you are in the role that you fought to be in, knowing that maybe your friends are not, or maybe there's not that many people who look like you who are around you in those spaces doesn't feel good, or just what you've had to go through to get there. And so I like to, during fashion weeks, go to things where, if my friends are doing something, for sure, if it's a celebration or a show or whatever, and just things that I feel like are going to be really inspiring and really good.
That actually is a really valuable learning opportunity for our listeners to get your advice on, which is how one goes about anchoring themselves in something greater or deeper than the external accolades that often feel like that's what defines them. How do you anchor yourself in something greater than the world that you love so much and spend so much of your time occupying for work?
It's not easy because fashion as a profession, it's all consuming. It's not a normal job. It becomes not only what you do, but to a certain extent, it sort of becomes who you are. It's how you socialize. It's who you socialize with. It's what occupies your mind. It's how you view the world. I'll give you a little story. I started the year going to a retreat, a therapeutic retreat, and it was incredible and certainly eye-opening, and not to be dramatic, but life-changing for sure. And one of the agreements, rules, was that for the duration of your time there, you could not share with anyone, any of the other attendees, your last name or what you do for a living. And just for those 7 days, having to renegotiate how I show up, how I introduce myself, how I converse about myself, how I refer to myself outside of sort of those layers of identity that are either given to you or earned by you through fashion or through any career. It was so revealing. And it was like taking a cold bath. And suddenly I realized that I, like many of us, had been for way too long sort of defining myself by what I do. And instead of who I am or why I do what I do, which I think is more to the point. And so I think that it requires an incredible amount of awareness and focus to not get too wrapped up in the rhythm of the fashion industry. And like you said, to the feedback or the comments that are solicited or unsolicited about you or your work, because I think that is really dangerous and can be very detrimental to one's personal and mental health.
And why is it that you think so many people gravitate towards critical voices? Because if you look at something that's a positive statement, its engagement is far lower. And then the moment it's critical, whether or not it's accurate, it suddenly has several comments and a surprising amount of industry people liking it. So what is it that you think is so attractive about negativity?
It's this interesting phenomenon. It's like self-aggrandizing thing, like sharing your opinion online. I find that a lot of the tone of what is popular online in that sort of fashion commentary space, it actually really lacks criticality, which I think is valuable. It's just critique. And I think that we're seeing culturally this sort of lack of civility and this sort of movement towards snarkiness and meanness and people building their identity around how cruel they can be. I have a lot of opinions about why this is. I think the world in general is unhappy. I think people are struggling. I think people are struggling financially. I think people are struggling with their mental health. I think that politically we're in a moment of turmoil. And it is very true that misery loves company, right? And I think that the internet provides a space where you can sort of anonymously attack someone, and whatever sort of release that provides you, you can experience that, but you don't have to stand on it. You don't have to be impeccable with your words or really even have a strong opinion about what you're commenting on. You can just like be mean. And it's cheap and it's hurtful. And I think that people are on the other side of that computer reading these comments, seeing these people make these vlogs. Is vlog still a word? Sorry, I'm old.
Yeah.
People still make vlogs. Okay.
Yeah.
Making these vlogs about, people's work. And my thing is always just like, well, you fucking do it. Like when's the last time that you made a fucking picture or a collection or a magazine or anything, frankly? Like, do you know how hard it is to like work in this current atmosphere? And also, I don't think anyone ever said to themselves, you know what, today I'm going to do a really bad job. I'm going to make a really shit collection and I'm going to make sure the pictures are as ugly as possible. And I want everyone to hate it. Like no one does. Like the intentions are always to do something good. And I think there is something very valuable about remembering that when you're commenting on someone's work. It's okay not to like someone, like to like something. But it's not okay to say like, oh, this person should jump out the window. What would make them think that anyone would wear this color? Or like, oh, the makeup artist is just, she's disgusting. Or this celebrity, like, ew, look at the length of her skirt. Like, look at her thighs. It just baffles me why people think that that is acceptable and why they think that people don't have feelings and aren't affected by that.
No, it's insane. It's very much the men in the arena quote by Teddy Roosevelt, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Absolutely. I think we've just moved away from valuing civility and I don't know, a connection to the human experience. I'm generalizing. Like, obviously, there's a huge group of people who feel the same way that we do and who don't engage with this type of exchange or exchanges. But to your point, it seems way more popular to be an asshole than it does to like be kind and be constructive. Because I'm not saying like you shouldn't have an opinion. No, you should have an opinion. I think whenever you make work for a living, whenever you are an artist who gets paid for making work, whether you're a singer or a painter or an interior decorator or a photographer, the moment that you give that work to the world, it is open for discussion. You're giving it to the world. It's no longer yours. And people can engage with it however they will. They can discuss it however they will. So I'm not saying that criticality is wrong. However, I think the tone of voice where you're personally attacking people or being snarky just for the sake of it, that is wrong. Because I think we can all learn from each other. Like, I think that Kathy Horn, back in the day, sort of reading whatever designer their writes, it made them better. Or at least it fired them up and made them more spirited so that they thought, okay, really, girl? That's what you thought? So watch what I'm going to come back with next season. That type of exchange, I think, is super valuable. And I like that. Like, I love when I see people get fired up about something or passionate about something or give constructive feedback about why they think something went wrong. I think that exchange is important, but I don't think tearing people down is going to have the effect that people think it is. It's just going to discourage people. And I think that's a big part of the reason why people aren't taking risks, why you aren't seeing more work that feels tense or inspired or challenging, is because no one wants to get dragged by Sally from Nebraska. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, who wants that? So you'd rather do something that's sort of tried and true, that sort of feels passable, or that you think is going to be a guaranteed slam dunk because it's probably been done before.
Speaking of working hard, what is your relationship to time and how do you manage what justifies your investment of it? Because obviously we've talked about you coming back and missing the seasons in New York, even just the time away from your partner and kind of how that made you feel. What is your relationship to time and the amount of it that you have to put into work these days as far as your personal life?
It's definitely evolving.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I'm in a cycle of my life where I think I'm emerging from feeling as though I need to constantly be in motion. I really value stillness. And I think that in the last few years, a few things have happened, both directly and indirectly, like to me personally, but also some things are just sort of cultural events that occurred that really served as reminders to me of the brevity of life in general. Not to be morbid, but we give so much of ourselves, of our time, of our energy to what we do. And I think for myself, I never really viewed that as a negative thing because I was convinced that in order to be successful and in order to sustain success, you had to give everything. You had to just be vigilant and just so die hard, so in it. But then I started seeing friends have kids and I started seeing friends get married and I started seeing friends pass away. And I started seeing friends take a year off and coming back and picking up right where they left off. In fact, with a renewed sense of importance, and the industry was like, oh, great, he's back. Like, let's do it. And they're busier than ever. I've also seen someone pass away and be replaced on their job within 24 hours. Like another person was on a plane to finish that job. And so it just reminds you that although we are very privileged to be able to engage the way that we do and create the way that we do and have these incredible platforms and frankly, these amazing lives, like these amazing experiences, and get to engage with some of the most thought-provoking, intelligent, creative people in the world, which is great. But you also have to leave something for yourself. I have had these conversations a lot throughout the past several years, and I think a lot about what we do now, how it affects the future, like our legacy, I guess. What will be this generation's legacy? And I think about that in relation to the amount of time that we sort of invest in like living in this space. And I don't know if somehow I feel unsettled at the moment. And I reject the idea that in order to be impactful, you have to live in this thing 24/7.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the obvious question, which is, what do you think is contemporary now?
I think what's contemporary now is looking within to truly decide what you think about anything, any event, any person. I think what's contemporary is defining for yourself what it is that you want to give to the world, how it is that you want to show up. It's very important in this moment for all of us to remember that we are individuals, but that collectively is how we make an impact. And I think the herd mentality that previously felt like the prevailing energy of fashion, it's not contemporary anymore. I think we need more independent thinkers, and I think that feels very contemporary.
Beautifully said, as always, a series of mic drops. Thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of What's Contemporary Now. A special thanks to our producer, Sasha Grinblatt. Audio post-production by Chase Coughlin with original theme music by Joseph Topmiller and Chase Coughlin of The Black Soft. And visual design by Aaron Meager and Graham Prentice. Subscribe now to be the first to catch new episodes each week. And if you've enjoyed listening, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a review and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for additional content and join the conversation. Let us know what you think is contemporary now.